And so for the Bodhisattva began a long and lengthy search for enlightenment that led him to numerous teachers. Despite all his efforts, he could not attain his goal, and, disappointed, he turned away in order to search in other directions. On the bank of the river Nairanjana, he undertook an asceticism that lasted 6 years and brought him to the brink of death. Nevertheless, that too did not bring him enlightenment. At the behest of the gods Indra and Brahma, who feared for his life, he decided to end his fast. At this, 5 travelling monks who had joined him turned their backs upon him in disappointment. Exhausted, the Bodhisattva washed his filthy clothing in the Nairanjana and then accepted from the village maiden Sujata a nourishing dish made of milk and rice that immediately gave strength to his emaciated body. The Bodhisattva had learned that only the middle way leads to enlightenment, and that the extremes of self-denial or sensual pleasure are the false paths. He recalled his first meditation many years ago and finally became convinced that this must be the right path to enlightenment. Not far from his place of fasting, under an enormous fig tree that was to become the tree of enlightenment, the Bodhisattva spread out an armful of grass, lowered himself upon it, and spoke. "Upon this seat, though my body dry up and my skin, my bones and my flesh be dissolved without having reached enlightenment, no matter how long and difficult to reach, I shall not stir from this seat." After attaining enlightenment, it occurred to the Buddha that the knowledge he had attained would be too difficult for people to comprehend. He therefore decided to retain this knowledge for himself alone. But the gods, Indra and Brahma, asked the enlightened one to spread his knowledge and set the wheel of law into motion out of compassion for the other beings. Only after both gods had asked him 3 times did the Buddha with heavy heart agree, for he knew well how great his exertions would be. The Buddha pondered the question of to whom he should first proclaim his law. With his all-perceiving eye, he realized that his former teachers were dead. There remained the 5 monks who had once accompanied him in his asceticism and who were residing in the deer park of Sarnath. Arriving there, he was quickly recognized by the monks from afar, but they believed they saw in him still the irresolute ascetic of former days. But the aura of the Buddha suddenly captivated them. With reverential awe, they heeded the first sermon of the Sublime One, and so became the first monks of Buddhism. This first sermon, of the utmost importance for Buddhism, is also called the setting in motion of the wheel of law, and is symbolized by a wheel with a pair of deer. With this sermon, the trinity of Buddha, law, and community is attained for the first time. After the first sermon, the Buddha went to Kashyapa, the famous leader of a sect in Uruvilva, not far from the place where he had attained enlightenment some time before. The Buddha wanted to convince Kashyapa and his 500 followers of his law. To do so, he needed to perform various miraculous deeds. Legendary is his battle with the fire-breathing dragon in the sacrificial temple of Kashyapa. For a whole night, the dragon and the Buddha hurled tongues of fire against each other until, exhausted, the dragon gave up. By showing his magical powers, the Buddha was often able to win over leaders of other sects and their followers to his law. Probably the 3 most famous miracles are those the enlightened one performed not far from the capital of the powerful kingdom of Kosala, Shravasti. The leaders of 6 sects had challenged the Buddha to a contest, during which he accomplished 3 miracles. Through the power of his spirit, he made a mango tree grow from a seed within seconds, and under the shadow of the tree he began to preach. In his second miracle, the famous twin miracles, he brought forth fire from his upper body and streams of water from his lower body simultaneously. And lastly, the Buddha accomplished the principal miracle of Shravasti, also called the miracle of multiplication, an infinitely large lotus with thousands of Buddha figures on its blossoms filled every inch of the firmament. Since one of the tasks of an enlightened one is to teach one's father and mother, the Buddha spent 3 months in Trayastrimsha heaven in order to preach there. The Buddha's cousin, Devadatta, took advantage of the absence of the Buddha in order to create the first schism in the Buddhist community. At his incitement, the king of Magadha and patron of the Buddha, King Bimbisara of Rajagriha, was dethroned and later murdered by his son, Ajatashatru. Thus, Devadatta became leader of the large Buddhist community of Rajagriha. 3 times he tried to kill the Enlightened One in vain. The most famous episode is that of the powerful elephant Nalagiri, who was feared in the city of Rajagriha for being a murderer of men. One morning, Devadatta and King Ajatashatru set this elephant upon the Enlightened One. In his rage, Nalagiri threatened to trample the Enlightened One underfoot. But when the Buddha raised his right hand, the wild elephant grew calm in an instant and kneeled down deferentially before him. When he was 80 years old, a very advanced age for the time, the Buddha sensed that his end was near. With a group of his most loyal followers, he travelled to Kushinagara, the capital of the Mala people, so that here in a forest he might enter definitive death, the parinirvana. After he had answered all the questions of the monks pertaining to his teachings and the discipline of the order, he asked his most trusted servant, the monk Ananda, "Please, O Ananda, prepare for me a bed between a pair of shala trees with its head pointing to the north. I am tired and wish to lie down. There are 4 places truly worth visiting whose sight makes the heart of a well-trained believer beat faster, the places of which is said, 'This is where was born he who completed the path. This is where he awoke to the highest enlightenment of all. This is where he set in motion the wheel of law, and this is where he entered the complete nirvana.' At that, he lay down upon his right side and spoke his final words. 'Decay is inherent in all composite things. Work out your salvation with diligence.' Then he died peacefully in the Shala forest near Kushinagara, mourned by his followers and the Mala people. The body of the Buddha was treated as though it were the body of a king and ruler of the world, a Chakravartin. The Mala people wrapped it in elegant cloths, soaked them with oil, and lay the mortal remains of the Buddha in a coffin. They continually poured melted butterfat into the blazing flames so that the coffin would burn up completely without remains. For 7 days and nights the ashes were venerated and not touched. The Brahman Drona divided the ashes equally into 8 urns in order to avoid any conflict among the royal houses. Like the ashes of the Buddha, the ashes of highly regarded members of the Buddhist community were kept in precious reliquaries and enshrined in special sacred buildings called stupas. As the time of his death approached, the Buddha addressed the following words to his favorite student. "O Ananda, as they treat the dead body of a Chakravartin, so should they treat the body of the perfected one. Where 4 roads cross, there should be erected a tomb for the perfected one. Each of the 8 royal kingdoms erected its own monument, a stupa, within which to preserve the urn bestowed to it. In addition, a stupa was built over the place where the Buddha's coffin had been burned. These sacred buildings are still revered today as holy shrines by the Buddhists. And whoever shall there place garlands, or flowers, or sandalwood, or make salutation there, or become in its presence calm in heart, will attain peace and prosperity for a long time.